The spring of 1812 arrived in London like a charming but insistent guest, bringing with it the fashionable return of society from their country estates. The season had begun in earnest, and Lady Georgiana Valmont stood at the periphery of Lady Harrington's ballroom, watching the whirl of silk gowns and tailored coats with a discerning eye. "You seem remarkably uninterested in the eligible gentleman this evening, my dear," observed her aunt, Lady Eleanor Sheffield, a widow whose reputation for sharp wit was matched only by her skill at whist. "I had thought, after 2 seasons, you might have developed a strategy beyond observing everyone as if they were specimens in a naturalist's collection." Georgiana smiled, the gesture warming her intelligent green eyes. "But aunt, observation is the most valuable skill one can cultivate. For instance, I have observed that Lord Pembroke has already consumed 4 glasses of champagne, and it is not yet 11. Miss Harrington has twice adjusted her corset when she believed no one was watching. And the Duke of Kensington's new wife appears to be with child, though they have announced nothing." Lady Eleanor raised her lorgnette to examine the Duchess. 6 weeks at the very least." "Well spotted." She lowered her glass and regarded her niece. "Your powers of observation will not secure you a husband, my dear. Your father has charged me with seeing you settled, and at 23, we cannot afford another season of your contemplation." Before Georgiana could respond, a ripple moved through the assembly, conversations dimming momentarily before resuming with renewed vigor. The cause soon became apparent as Frederick Knighton, Prince of Thornfield, entered the ballroom with his customary air of restrained ennui. "Well," murmured Lady Eleanor with undisguised interest, "perhaps this evening might prove more stimulating than anticipated." Georgiana's gaze settled on the prince, noting the precision of his evening attire, the cool detachment in his grey eyes, and the subtle tension in his jaw that suggested he found such gatherings as tiresome as she did. The Prince of Thornfield was newly returned from diplomatic service abroad, heir to a small but strategically significant principality that bordered Prussia. At 30, he remained unmarried, a fact that ensured his every appearance at social functions caused a flutter among ambitious mothers and their marriageable daughters. "He looks as if he'd rather be anywhere else," Georgiana remarked. Lady Eleanor's fan snapped open with practiced elegance. "A sentiment you share, no doubt. Perhaps you might find common ground in your mutual disdain for society." "Aunt Eleanor," Georgiana said with a hint of admonishment, "you know perfectly well I do not disdain society. I merely find its rituals occasionally tedious and its conversations predictable." "Indeed," her aunt replied, hiding a smile. "How fortunate then that His Highness is approaching. Perhaps you might favor him with your observations on the tedium of the ton." True to her word, the prince was making his way toward them, having completed his obligatory greeting to their hostess. He moved with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, his eyes scanning the room as if seeking something, or someone, specific. Georgiana straightened almost imperceptibly, her pulse quickening despite her determination to remain composed. She had met the prince only once before, at a diplomatic reception hosted by her father, the Earl of Valmont, where they had exchanged precisely 3 sentences about the weather. "Lady Sheffield," the prince said, executing a flawless bow. "A pleasure to see you again." "Your Highness," Lady Eleanor curtsied with appropriate deference. "How kind of you to remember an old widow like myself. May I present my niece, Lady Georgiana Valmont?" Georgiana sank into a curtsy, the soft blue silk of her gown pooling around her like water. "Your Highness." When she rose, she found his grey eyes studying her with an intensity that sent a flicker of warmth across her cheeks. "Lady Georgiana," he said, his voice carrying a faint accent that gave his English an appealing musicality. "We have met before, I believe. At your father's reception for the Austrian ambassador." "Indeed, Your Highness," she replied, surprised he recalled the encounter. "We discussed the unseasonable rain." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "And you remarked that English weather, like English politics, is remarkable only for its inconstancy." Lady Eleanor coughed delicately. "Georgiana, my dear, I believe I see Lady Pembroke signaling to me. You will excuse me, Your Highness? Perhaps you might keep my niece company while I attend to my old friend." Before either could respond, Lady Eleanor glided away, leaving them in the polite isolation of the ballroom's edge. Your aunt, the prince observed dryly, is not particularly subtle in her machinations. Georgiana laughed softly. No, subtlety has never been Aunt Eleanor's preferred weapon. She favors the direct assault. And you, Lady Georgiana? His eyes held a glint of genuine curiosity. What is your preferred approach to battle? She considered the question, her head tilting slightly. I prefer reconnaissance before engagement, Your Highness. Knowledge before action. A wise strategy, he replied, his gaze moving briefly to the dancers swirling across the floor. One I share. He turned back to her, his expression softening. Would you do me the honor of dancing the next set? I find myself in need of stimulating conversation, and I suspect you might provide it. The music for the current dance was drawing to a close, and Georgiana noted with interest that at least 3 young ladies had positioned themselves strategically near the prince, clearly hoping to catch his attention. I would be delighted, Your Highness, she said, though I should warn you, my conversation is often deemed unconventional. He offered his arm, his lips curving into a more genuine smile. Precisely what I was hoping for, Lady Georgiana. As they took their places for the quadrille, Georgiana became aware of the eyes following them, the whispered speculations already beginning to circulate. The prince, however, seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on her. Tell me, he said as they moved through the opening figures of the dance, what do you observe about this gathering that others might miss? She met his gaze with surprise. You wish for honesty, Your Highness. I always prefer honesty, Lady Georgiana. It is a rare commodity in diplomatic circles, and rarer still in ballrooms. She smiled, warming to the challenge. Very well. I observe that Lord Harrington's new portrait in the entrance hall has been painted to minimize his receding hairline. That Lady Jersey's diamonds are likely paste, given her husband's recent losses at the gaming tables. And that you, Your Highness, have spent the majority of your evening scanning the room as if searching for someone specific, while simultaneously avoiding conversation with anyone who might introduce you to eligible young ladies. The prince missed a step, recovering so smoothly that only Georgiana noticed. His eyes widened fractionally before crinkling at the corners with genuine amusement. Remarkable, he murmured as they circled each other. You have me at a disadvantage, Lady Georgiana. I doubt that very much, Your Highness. Frederick, he said suddenly. When we are not being observed by the collective ears of society, I would be honored if you would call me Frederick. The invitation to such familiarity was unexpected, and Georgiana felt a flutter of something unfamiliar beneath her ribs. That would be most improper, Your Highness. Indeed it would, he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers as they separated in the dance and then returned to each other. Yet I suspect you enjoy the occasional impropriety, in thought, if not in deed. The dance brought them close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of sandalwood and something uniquely him. You presume much based on a single conversation about weather and one dance, Your Highness. Frederick, he reminded her quietly. And I presume nothing. I observe, just as you do. The music drew to a close, and they stood facing each other, both slightly breathless from more than just the exertion of the dance. What do you observe about me, then? Georgiana asked, her voice lower than she intended. He offered his arm to escort her from the floor. That you are trapped in a society that values your beauty but overlooks your intelligence. That you read extensively, your references to historical parallels in our brief conversation at your father's reception betrayed a knowledge of European politics uncommon in young ladies. And that you are not merely observing this gathering, you are studying it, collecting impressions and insights as a botanist might collect specimens. Georgiana felt exposed, as if he had glimpsed something she thought well hidden. You are very perceptive, Your Highness. Frederick, he said again, more insistently. They had reached the edge of the dance floor, where Lady Eleanor stood in conversation with the Countess of Wexford. Both older women glanced their way with poorly concealed interest. I should return to my aunt, Georgiana said, reluctant despite herself. The prince, Frederick, nodded, but there was a reluctance in his posture that mirrored her own. Before you go, might I impose upon you for one favor? Of course, Your Highness. He smiled at her deliberate formality. My mother is hosting a small literary salon tomorrow afternoon. Nothing formal, just a gathering of minds she finds interesting. Would you consider attending? I believe your observations would be invaluable. Georgiana felt a thrill of genuine excitement. The Dowager Princess of Thornfield was known for her patronage of the arts and her intellectual gatherings, which were far more stimulating than the typical afternoon calls that filled the social calendar. I would be delighted, she replied, unable to hide her enthusiasm. Excellent. Shall we say 3 o'clock? I'll send a carriage. Before she could respond to this surprisingly intimate arrangement, Lady Eleanor materialized at her side. Your Highness, she said, her eyes darting between them with undisguised curiosity. I trust my niece has not bored you with her unusual theories. Frederick bowed slightly. On the contrary, Lady Sheffield. Your niece's theories are the most refreshing conversation I've had since returning to England. He turned to Georgiana. Until tomorrow, Lady Georgiana. As he moved away, disappearing into the crowd of elegant guests, Lady Eleanor seized Georgiana's arm with surprising strength. What, precisely, is happening tomorrow? She demanded in a hushed tone. Georgiana smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the overheated ballroom. I've been invited to the Dowager Princess's literary salon. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened. Well, she said after a moment, perhaps your strategy of observation has yielded results after all. The Knighton townhouse on Berkeley Square was an elegant testament to restrained wealth and impeccable taste. Georgiana, dressed in a high-waisted gown of pale green muslin that complemented her auburn hair, was ushered into a drawing room where perhaps 20 guests were already engaged in animated conversation. The Dowager Princess, a striking woman whose silver-streaked dark hair and clear grey eyes left no doubt as to the source of her son's handsome features, rose to greet her. Lady Georgiana, she said warmly, taking both her hands. My son spoke most highly of you. I am delighted you could join us. The honor is mine, Your Highness, Georgiana replied, genuinely touched by the warmth of her reception. Please, in this setting, I am simply Helene, the older woman insisted. Titles have no place in the realm of ideas. She gestured around the room. We have poets and philosophers, scientists and artists, all here to share thoughts freely. Frederick mentioned you have an interest in literature. Among other subjects, Georgiana admitted. I find knowledge does not respect the boundaries we impose between disciplines. Helene's eyes lit with approval. Precisely so. Frederick, she called, and Georgiana turned to see him approaching, his expression brightening visibly when their eyes met. Show Lady Georgiana to the library. Mr. Wordsworth is discussing his latest work, and I believe she would find it of interest. Frederick offered his arm, and as they moved through the house, Georgiana noted the subtle differences between this residence and others she had visited. Books lay open on side tables, maps and charts were displayed alongside classical paintings, and the conversations they passed were passionate and substantive. Your mother has created something quite remarkable here, she observed. Frederick nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. She believes that intellectual curiosity should not be constrained by gender or title. It was her influence that led me to diplomatic service rather than a military career. A diplomatic prince with a philosopher queen for a mother, Georgiana mused. No wonder you find conventional society tedious. He laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. And what of you, Georgiana? What influences shaped your unconventional mind? The casual use of her given name sent a pleasant shiver through her, but she chose not to remark upon it. My father believes daughters should be as educated as sons. He allowed me free access to his library from the time I could read. My mother died when I was young, but Aunt Eleanor ensured I learned the social graces as well as intellectual pursuits. They had reached a magnificent library, where a small group had gathered around a distinguished gentleman who was reading poetry in a melodious voice. Frederick guided her to a seat slightly apart from the others. Wordsworth, he murmured close to her ear. Mother is a great patron of his work. For the next hour, Georgiana found herself utterly enchanted, not only by the poetry but by the discussion that followed, genuine intellectual debate where her contributions were valued and considered. Frederick remained by her side, occasionally offering insights that revealed a depth of literary knowledge she found surprising in a prince. As the gathering began to disperse for refreshments, Frederick touched her elbow lightly. "There's something I'd like to show you, if you're amenable." Curiosity piqued, Georgiana nodded. He led her through a side door and up a narrow staircase to a small, circular room at the top of a turret. Windows on all sides offered a panoramic view of London, and the walls were lined with maps and astronomical charts. "My private study," he explained, watching her face as she took in the room's contents. "Few people are invited here." Georgiana moved slowly around the perimeter, her fingers trailing lightly over globes, telescope, and carefully arranged correspondence. "It's wonderful," she said softly. "A room designed for understanding the world." He smiled, pleased by her comprehension. "Precisely. From here, I can observe without being observed. Consider problems without interruption." "And what problems occupy your thoughts, Frederick?" she asked, the intimate setting making his given name feel natural on her lips. His expression grew serious. "Many. My principality is small but strategically located. The machinations of Napoleon have made our position precarious. My diplomatic efforts here are aimed at securing British support should Prussia make demands we cannot meet. Hence your return to London and the marriage market," Georgiana surmised. "An English bride of good family would strengthen your ties to Britain." A shadow crossed his face. "You have discerned my purpose with your usual acuity. Though I admit, the prospect of a political marriage has grown increasingly distasteful." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits trapped in the expectations of their positions. The moment was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. Frederick crossed the room to open it, revealing a servant with a message. He read it quickly, his brow furrowing. "I apologize," he said, turning back to Georgiana. "An urgent diplomatic matter requires my attention. Please, feel free to remain here as long as you wish. The view at sunset is particularly fine." He hesitated, then added with unexpected intensity, "I would very much like to continue our conversation. Perhaps you might honor me by attending the opera tomorrow evening? My mother has a box, and she mentioned her desire to become better acquainted with you." "I would be delighted," Georgiana replied, her pulse quickening at the prospect. With a bow that somehow conveyed more than mere courtesy, Frederick departed, leaving Georgiana alone in his private sanctuary. She moved to the window, watching the late afternoon sun gild the rooftops of London, her thoughts in pleasant disarray. The prince was unlike anyone she had encountered, a man who valued her mind, who seemed genuinely interested in her observations. The possibility that his attention might be more than diplomatic strategy was both thrilling and dangerous to contemplate. Turning back to the room, her eye caught a small writing desk in the corner, where several letters lay partially concealed by a map. One bore a seal she recognized, the House of Valmont, her father's insignia. Curiosity warred with propriety. The letter was clearly private, and yet it bore her family's crest. What business did her father have with the prince that she was unaware of? Before she could decide, voices on the staircase alerted her that someone was approaching. Quickly moving away from the desk, she pretended to examine a celestial chart when the door opened to admit the Dowager Princess. "Ah, Georgiana," Helen said warmly. "Frederick mentioned he had brought you to his sanctuary. I hope you don't mind my intrusion, but I wish to speak with you privately." "Not at all, Your Helen," Georgiana corrected herself. "The room is magnificent. Frederick has always needed a place to think, to see beyond the immediate horizon." The older woman moved to stand beside Georgiana at the window. "My son tells me you possess a similar quality, the ability to see what others miss." "I merely observe," Georgiana demurred. "Observation is the beginning of wisdom." Helen's gaze was direct, assessing. "Frederick rarely invites anyone to this room. He must find your mind stimulating." There was something in her tone that suggested she was speaking of more than intellectual compatibility, and Georgiana felt herself flush. "The prince has been most kind," she said carefully. Helen smiled, the expression transforming her aristocratic features into something more approachable. "My son carries many burdens, Georgiana. The weight of a principality, the expectations of diplomatic success, the pressure to make an advantageous match. It is rare for him to find someone in whose company he can simply be himself." "I'm honored that he finds my company restful," Georgiana replied, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected confidence. "More than restful, I think," Helen said with gentle amusement. "But I will not embarrass you further. I came to invite you to join us for dinner before you depart. Frederick will be detained, unfortunately, but I would value the opportunity to know you better." As they descended the stairs together, Georgiana cast one last glance at the writing desk, the mystery of her father's correspondence with the prince still tugging at her mind. But the evening that followed, a dinner of intimate conversation with Helen and a small circle of artists and intellectuals, soon pushed the matter from her immediate thoughts. It was only later, as her carriage carried her home through the darkening streets of London, that Georgiana allowed herself to consider the implications of the day. The Prince of Thornfield, it seemed, found her company agreeable, perhaps even more than agreeable. His mother appeared to approve of their acquaintance. And tomorrow would bring another opportunity to explore whatever this connection between them might be. Yet the glimpsed letter nagged at her. What business did her father have with Frederick that would require private correspondence? And why had he never mentioned any connection to the Principality of Thornfield? The next evening found Georgiana seated in the Knighton's opera box, exquisitely attired in a gown of deep burgundy silk that Lady Eleanor had insisted was precisely right for making a certain prince lose his diplomatic composure. The Dowager Princess had welcomed her warmly, and Frederick's eyes had lingered on her with unmistakable admiration as he handed her into her seat. Now, as the first act of Mozart's Don Giovanni unfolded below, Georgiana was acutely aware of Frederick beside her, his arm occasionally brushing hers when he leaned close to murmur commentary on the performance. The opera itself, a tale of seduction, betrayal, and ultimate justice, seemed oddly resonant with her growing uncertainty about the prince's interest in her. Was his attention genuine, or was there some diplomatic strategy at play? The mysterious letter in his study suggested connections to her family that predated their meeting. Could his pursuit be motivated by some arrangement with her father? During the intermission, Helen excused herself to greet friends in a neighboring box, leaving Frederick and Georgiana momentarily alone. "You seem distracted this evening," he observed, his voice low and concerned. "Does the opera not please you?" Georgiana turned to face him, finding his grey eyes studying her with that now familiar intensity. "The opera is magnificent," she assured him. "I merely find myself preoccupied with questions." "Questions?" His brow furrowed slightly. "I hope I might provide answers, if they concern me." She hesitated, then decided directness was the only path forward. "Yesterday, in your study, I noticed a letter bearing my father's seal." Frederick stilled, his expression carefully neutral. "I see." "I did not read it," she hastened to add. "But its existence raises questions. My father has never mentioned any connection to Thornfield, yet you clearly correspond with him." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving to the theatre below, where the audience milled about during the intermission. "Your father and I have been in communication regarding diplomatic matters," he said finally. "Nothing that should concern you." "Yet it does concern me," she pressed gently. "Particularly given your sudden interest in my company." His eyes snapped back to hers, a flash of something, hurt? Anger, visible before he schooled his features. "You believe my attention to you is somehow connected to diplomatic correspondence with your father?" Put so baldly, the suggestion seemed absurd, yet Georgiana could not dismiss it entirely. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted. "I know only that coincidences in matters of state are rare." Frederick leaned closer, his voice dropping further. "Georgiana, whatever business I have with your father is entirely separate from the pleasure I take in your company." The sincerity in his eyes was compelling, yet Georgiana's natural caution remained. Before she could respond, Helene returned, bringing with her a distinguished gentleman she introduced as the ambassador to Prussia. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and magnificent music, but an undercurrent of tension remained between Georgiana and Frederick. When he handed her into her carriage at evening's end, his touch lingered on her gloved hand. "I would like to call on you tomorrow," he said, his eyes searching hers. "There are matters we should discuss more privately." She nodded, unable to deny the desire to understand both the mystery of his correspondence with her father and the nature of her own growing feelings for this complex man. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, stepping back as her carriage pulled away. Georgiana watched his figure recede, her mind awhirl with questions and possibilities. Tomorrow, perhaps, would bring clarity. The following afternoon found Georgiana in her father's library, a sanctuary she had retreated to after receiving a note from Frederick postponing his call due to an urgent diplomatic meeting. The disappointment she felt at the delay was more acute than she cared to admit, even to herself. The Earl of Valmont's library was a testament to his scholarly interests, walls lined with volumes on history, politics, natural philosophy, and literature from across Europe. It was here that Georgiana had developed her love of learning, and here she often came when seeking solace or clarity. Her father was currently at his estate in Hampshire, overseeing spring planting, which left Georgiana free to peruse his correspondence desk without interruption. If there were answers to the mystery of his connection to Frederick, they might be found there. The search proved fruitful more quickly than she had anticipated. In a drawer containing diplomatic communications, she discovered several letters from Frederick, dating back nearly 6 months before their meeting at Lady Harrington's ball. The correspondence was primarily concerned with trade agreements and mutual defense strategies, but one passage in the most recent letter caught her attention. "Regarding the matter of my proposed visit to Valmont Manor, I believe it would be most advantageous to delay until after the London season has commenced. Lady Georgiana's reputation for discernment and intelligence suggests she would be a valuable ally in our endeavours, but I prefer to make her acquaintance in a less structured setting than a formal diplomatic introduction would allow." Georgiana read the passage twice, her heart beating faster with each reading. Frederick had known of her before their meeting, had specifically planned to make her acquaintance. But why? What endeavours required her involvement? And why had her father never mentioned any of this to her? Further investigation revealed a sealed packet addressed to Frederick in her father's hand, apparently prepared but not yet sent. The temptation to open it was nearly overwhelming, but Georgiana resisted. Breaking her father's seal would cross a line she was not prepared to cross, at least not yet. Instead, she carefully returned everything to its place, her mind racing. Frederick had spoken of diplomatic concerns regarding Prussia. Her father had extensive connections in the Germanic states through his first wife, Georgiana's mother. Perhaps there was some connection there? Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger bearing another note from Frederick. This one was brief but urgent. "Circumstances have changed. I must speak with you immediately. Expect me within the hour." Georgiana barely had time to compose herself before Frederick was announced. He entered the drawing room with none of his usual measured grace, his movements betraying a tension she had not previously observed in him. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, bowing briefly. "I would not impose without urgent cause." "You seem troubled, Your Highness," she replied, deliberately reverting to formality. "Please, be seated." He remained standing, his eyes searching her face. "I have just come from a meeting with the Prussian ambassador. Information has reached me that suggests your father may be in danger." Of all the things she had expected him to say, this was not among them. "My father? What danger could possibly threaten him in Hampshire?" "Not in Hampshire," Frederick said grimly. "Your father is not overseeing spring planting. He is in Vienna, engaged in secret negotiations that certain factions within the Prussian government find problematic." Georgiana felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her. "That's impossible. My father sent letters from Hampshire just last week. Misdirection, to protect his true location." Frederick moved closer, his expression softening with concern. Georgiana, I understand this is shocking, but I need you to trust me. Your father has been acting as an unofficial envoy for British interests in negotiations that could reshape the balance of power in Central Europe. And you know this because... She left the question hanging, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Because I have been coordinating with him. Thornfield's position makes it a critical buffer between Prussia and the Austrian Empire. Your father's connections in Vienna, through his first marriage, made him the ideal representative for British interests. Frederick ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration she had not seen from him before. We had hoped to keep you uninvolved, for your own safety. Georgiana stood, moving to the window to gather her thoughts. Outside, spring sunshine bathed Berkeley Square in golden light, the ordinary scene at odds with the extraordinary revelations unfolding within. So your interest in me, she said finally, turning to face him, was simply a way to maintain contact with my father's household during his absence. Frederick's expression shifted from concern to something akin to shock. No. Georgiana, you cannot believe that. Can I not? Her voice remained steady despite the ache developing in her chest. You corresponded with my father about me before we ever met. You planned our chance encounter. What am I to believe? He closed the distance between them in 3 swift strides, stopping just short of touching her. Yes, I knew of you before we met. Yes, I arranged to be introduced. But not for the reasons you imagine. Enlighten me, then, she challenged, lifting her chin. Your father spoke of you often in his correspondence, of your intelligence, your perception, your unconventional mind. He mentioned that you had developed a cipher for your personal correspondence that even he could not break. Frederick's eyes held hers, imploring understanding. When the situation in Vienna began to deteriorate, we realized we might need a secure method of communication that would not be recognized as diplomatic in nature. So you sought me out for my skill with ciphers. The explanation seemed both plausible and somehow more painful than her initial assumption. Initially, yes, he admitted. I intended to meet you, assess whether your father's pride in your abilities was justified, and if so, request your assistance. A smile touched his lips, warming his eyes. What I did not anticipate was meeting a woman who would challenge my every assumption, who would see through diplomatic facades as if they were glass, who would make me question whether duty and personal happiness must always be separate paths. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, yet Georgiana's natural caution reasserted itself. Pretty words, Your Highness, but the fact remains that you deceived me. Not in what matters most, he insisted. My admiration for your mind, my enjoyment of your company, my growing feelings for you, those have been entirely genuine. He hesitated, then added quietly, Ask my mother if you doubt me. She has chided me repeatedly for allowing diplomatic concerns to become hopelessly entangled with personal ones. Despite herself, Georgiana felt a flicker of hope. And what personal concerns would those be? Frederick's expression softened into something so tender it made her breath catch. The concern that I might have found the one woman in all of England who would make a political marriage unnecessary, because she would satisfy both the diplomatic requirements and the desires of my heart. Before Georgiana could respond to this extraordinary declaration, the drawing-room door opened to admit Lady Eleanor, who took one look at their intense expressions and raised an eyebrow. I see I am interrupting, she observed dryly. However, this cannot wait. A messenger has just arrived from Dover with news that should be of interest to both of you. She held out a sealed letter, which Georgiana took with trembling fingers. Breaking the seal, she read quickly, her eyes widening. My father has returned to England, she announced, looking up at Frederick. He will arrive in London tomorrow. Frederick's relief was palpable. Then he is safe. Thank God. There's more, Georgiana continued, scanning the rest of the letter. He writes that the Vienna negotiations were successful, that Thornfield's sovereignty is secure, and that he looks forward to discussing matters of both state and families upon his return. She looked up, confusion evident in her expression. What matters of family could possibly involve Thornfield? Lady Eleanor coughed delicately. If I might hazard a guess, based on certain communications I have had with my brother, I believe the Earl may have been laying diplomatic groundwork for a potential alliance of a more personal nature. Understanding dawned on Georgiana like sunrise. My father has been negotiating a marriage contract, she said slowly, between Thornfield and me. Frederick's expression confirmed her deduction. It was discussed as a possibility, he admitted. A diplomatic solution that would strengthen ties between our nations. But I insisted that nothing be formalized without your knowledge and consent. How considerate, Georgiana said, a hint of her usual wit reasserting itself despite the shock. To allow me some illusion of choice in a matter already half settled between nations. No, Frederick said with unexpected vehemence. There is no arrangement without your willing participation. I made that abundantly clear to your father from the outset. Lady Eleanor, observing the tension between them, moved discreetly toward the door. I believe you two have much to discuss. I shall inform the servants that His Highness will be staying for tea. When they were alone again, Frederick approached Georgiana cautiously, as one might a startled deer. I understand your anger, he said softly. You have been kept in ignorance of matters that directly concern your future. Yes, I have, she agreed, but some of the heat had left her tone. Though I begin to wonder if perhaps I have not been as observant as I pride myself on being. There were clues, were there not? Things I might have noticed had I not been distracted. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Distracted. By you, she admitted, meeting his gaze directly. By conversations that engaged my mind. By attention that seemed to value me for more than my dowry or family connections. By the novel experience of being seen. Frederick's expression softened further. I have seen you, Georgiana. From our first meeting, I have seen the woman behind the social mask, the mind behind the proper manners. That, at least, has been no diplomatic strategy. He took her hand, his touch sending warmth coursing up her arm. When your father first suggested the possibility of an alliance through marriage, I agreed to meet you out of duty. But every moment since has been driven by a far more personal desire, to know you better, to understand the woman who observes so keenly, to discover whether the connection I felt might be reciprocated. Georgiana looked down at their joined hands, considering. And what have you concluded, Your Highness? Frederick, he corrected gently, lifting her chin with his free hand so that she met his gaze. I have concluded that diplomatic necessity has, for once, aligned perfectly with my heart's desire. I have concluded that no political alliance could be as valuable to me as your partnership. I have concluded that I am falling in love with you, Georgiana Valmont, and that I would court you properly, openly, with your father's blessing but without his arrangement, if you would permit it. The declaration hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. Georgiana felt as if she stood at a crossroads, one path leading to the safe, conventional future she had always expected, the other toward something both frightening and exhilarating in its uncertainty. You realize, she said finally, a smile beginning to curve her lips, that any courtship between us will be highly unconventional. I will ask uncomfortable questions. I will demand honest answers. I will expect to be consulted on matters both personal and political. Frederick's eyes lit with relief and something warmer. I would expect nothing less. In fact, I would be disappointed by anything less. And I will insist on maintaining my own correspondence, uncensored by diplomatic concerns, she added, her smile growing. Provided you teach me your unbreakable cipher, he countered, drawing her slightly closer. And I will need access to your library, including your private study. Frederick laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. My study, my library, my diplomatic dispatches, all shall be open to you. Though I warn you, the view from that turret can become quite addictive. The view, Georgiana said softly, is not the only thing I find addictive about your company. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her, propriety and pending parental approval be damned. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that somehow conveyed more passion than a more improper embrace might have done. Tomorrow, he said, his voice rough with restrained emotion, I will call on your father formally. I will discuss matters of state, secure his approval for our courtship, and endure whatever conditions he sets with diplomatic patience. And after that? Georgiana asked, breathless with the possibilities unfolding before her. Frederick smiled, his eyes promising adventures both intellectual and emotional that she could scarcely imagine. After that, Lady Georgiana, we begin writing our own story, one that even your keen observations could not have anticipated. The following afternoon, Georgiana waited in her father's study, nervously smoothing her pale yellow muslin gown as she watched the Earl and Frederick engaged in intense conversation by the window. They had been closeted together for over an hour, their expressions alternating between seriousness and occasional shared laughter. Finally, they turned toward her, and her father beckoned her to join them. "Georgiana," the Earl said, his weathered face bearing the fatigue of recent travel but his eyes bright with affection, "His Highness has made his intentions clear. He seeks my permission to court you, with a view toward marriage." Georgiana's heart quickened, but she kept her expression composed. "And what have you replied, father?" The Earl glanced at Frederick, a hint of amusement in his gaze. "I informed His Highness that while I have the highest regard for him as a diplomat and potential ally, my daughter's hand is hers alone to bestow. I merely require assurance that any union would respect her unusual qualities of mind and independence of spirit." "And I," Frederick interjected, his eyes never leaving Georgiana's face, "assured your father that those very qualities are what I value most highly, that I seek a partner, not merely a princess." The Earl cleared his throat. "Well, then, I believe I have some correspondence to attend to. Perhaps you two might take a turn in the garden?" With the door open to the terrace, of course, he added with a stern look that didn't quite hide his approval. As they strolled among the early roses of the townhouse garden, Frederick offered Georgiana his arm, which she took with newfound certainty. "Your father is an extraordinary man," Frederick observed. "He spoke of you with such pride, not as a possession to be advantageously placed, but as a person of unique value." "He has always encouraged my peculiarities," Georgiana agreed with a fond smile. "Even when society found them perplexing." "Not peculiarities," Frederick corrected, stopping to face her beside a fountain that bubbled softly in the garden center. "Strengths. Qualities that make you uniquely suited to the life I would offer you." "And what life is that?" she asked, curious about the vision he held. "One divided between Thornfield and London. One filled with diplomatic challenges and intellectual pursuits. One where your observations might help navigate the troubled waters of European politics." His expression grew more intent. "One where you would rule at my side as a true partner, your counsel valued in matters of state as well as matters of the heart." The picture he painted was so far removed from the conventional marriage she had always expected that Georgiana found herself momentarily speechless. "You offer a great deal," she said finally. "But I wonder if you understand what you would gain in return." Frederick smiled, reaching to take both her hands in his. "A woman who sees beyond surfaces. Who challenges assumptions. Who brings both brilliance and compassion to every encounter." His voice dropped lower, intimate despite their public setting. "A woman I have come to admire beyond all others, whose presence makes diplomatic tedium bearable, whose smile I find myself seeking across crowded rooms, whose thoughts I wish to know on matters great and small." Georgiana felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "When you put it that way," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions tumbling through her, "I find myself unable to construct a logical argument against the arrangement." "Is logic all that guides you in this moment?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability showing through his diplomatic composure. She smiled then, allowing the joy she felt to shine unchecked. "No, Frederick. Logic merely confirms what my heart had already decided." "And what has your heart decided, Georgiana?" he pressed, his own heart visible in his eyes. "That perhaps keen observation and diplomatic strategy can sometimes lead to unexpected treasures. That connections forged through political necessity can deepen into something far more profound." She stepped closer, propriety be damned. "That I would very much like to explore what exists between us, with the freedom to discover where it might lead." Frederick's smile was radiant. Then may I formally request the honor of courting you, Lady Georgiana Valmont, with hopes that you might one day consider becoming the Princess of Thornfield. You may, Your Highness, she replied, her eyes dancing with happiness and mischief. Though I warn you, a courtship conducted under the eyes of both the diplomatic corps and London society promises to be anything but conventional. I would expect nothing less, he said, lifting her hand to his lips once more. In fact, I believe our story has already begun most unconventionally, with a prince, a lady, and some very private letters that led to very public happiness. As they continued their stroll, observed by her father from the terrace and undoubtedly by half the servants of the household, Georgiana reflected that for all her skill at observation, she had failed to see the most important thing of all, that in finding a man who valued her mind, she had also found one who had captured her heart. And that, she decided, was an observation worth recording in the most private pages of her heart.